Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. The High Court has ruled that a loving parent can consent to a child taking puberty blockers, in part reversing last year's decision in the Kira Bell case. Last December, the High Court ruled that children under the age of 16 must understand the implications both of puberty blockers and of potentially moving on to hormone therapy in order to consent to the medication. The case was brought by Kira Bell, who began taking blockers aged 16 and now regrets that decision. The latest ruling comes after Labour MP Rosie Duffield was forced to pull out of the party's conference later this week after receiving online threats from militant transgender activists about her beliefs on transgender rights. So joining me now is Marion Calder, co-founder of For Women Scotland, a Scottish feminist group that opposes proposed reforms allowing individuals to change their recorded sex in legal documents by means of self-declaration. Now, Marion, your group had a huge protest. There were lots of videos that went viral on this protest outside Holyrood a few days, not so long ago. And then a lot of critics were saying, well, these people protesting, they're just anti-trans. They don't want people to have equal rights. What do you say to those critics?
We're not anti-anything. We're pro-women's rights. That's it. Do you know what I mean? We are for Women Scotland. We actually campaign on behalf of women's rights across all different aspects. It's not, everyone keeps talking about, we're talking about the trans narrative. It's not anything to do with that. It's about solely women's rights, and actually what various different pieces of legislation that Scottish Government are bringing in, which is having a key disastrous rollback on women's rights. And so we are trying to actually get Scottish Government and Nicola Sturgeon to engage with us to actually listen to women. So what our protest 2 weeks ago, or just over 2 weeks ago, was to actually kind of make some noise that she could actually hear women actually going, no, there isn't just one dialogue happening here. There are other women actually talking about, saying, no, you will listen to us. But apparently she believed our views weren't valid.
It's interesting that you say make some noise, because we were talking earlier about the protest bill or the policing bill, which would actually criminalise protests that were too loud. And I believe didn't the SNP introduce some legislation saying we can't have protests too near to Holyrood? They're trying
to create a perimeter so that the kind of protest can't be near the building in case we annoy kind of the staff working inside. I think we were predominantly annoying the kind of First Minister by having women that were actually standing outside and going, you're not actually listening to us.
But it was a peaceful protest. I saw the footage.
So, absolutely. Peaceful. It was a bit noisy. You get those placards there.
Yeah,
there was
you would expect.
Women's rights, listen to us. I mean, we had a fantastic kind of a reaction from the general public. It was the biggest meeting outside of Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter, the pro-independence aspects.
Yes.
So we were the largest kind of group that they have seen in years.
Can you explain to the people watching, because they'll be saying to themselves, well, what women's rights are threatened? What are you talking about? Why does, for instance, gender self-identification possibly threat? Because they would say it's nothing to do with you. That's how people want to identify. Can you explain?
The right to self-ID is adult human female. The right to name ourselves. If we can't name ourselves, we actually can't protect ourselves in legislation. And we've seen today already kind of Ed Davey and various other individuals unable to actually name what a woman is.
That was interesting.
And wanting to open up all spaces and doesn't think that we actually need to have single-sex spaces.
But you could see in that interview with Ed Davey on the Andrew Marr show, where Andrew Marr was saying, what is the problem with the dictionary definition of woman as adult human female? And you could see that he couldn't get out of it. He didn't know quite what to say. He was flummoxed. He was sort of talking about how it's a much more complicated issue than that. Is it?
It really isn't. It's biology. There's male and female. I don't know how that we've gotten to a situation when everyone's too terrified to actually have this conversation about it, to actually state that there are two sexes is something that we've all understood for millennia. We know how we actually make babies. We get that.
Most of us do, yeah.
Well, most, yeah. It's like, well, apparently some people have actually forgotten how.
Well, but do you, I mean...
We all came from a woman.
Do you think, though, that I mean, the fact that should be perceived a controversial statement is quite astonishing. But do you fear? I mean, I worry that a lot of the press and the way that people depict people like you or gender critical feminists is as hateful figures who want to deprive other people of their rights. And is that maybe why people are reticent when it comes to making these points? Because they're intimidated.
Well, I think you're quite right, because recently we get called, I've got to be careful what I'm saying here, but kind of Nazi, feminazi, TERF, witch.
Yes.
Recently we got, I'd say, Taliban aligned, which is a new one. We've never had that one before.
Blimey, okay.
And
very dramatic.
This is also a bit dramatic. All we're just actually standing up and actually saying that we actually believe sex is a reality and that we need to actually talk about this. And if we can't talk about this, if we can't define what a woman is, what does this actually mean to us as a sex class?
Can you explain then? Because when you talk about women's only spaces, and we're talking about things like domestic violence refuge centres, we're talking about toilet facilities, changing facilities. What do you say to critics who have often said, but you seem to be implying that there is a pandemic of trans people breaking into women's only spaces, or that you're basically tarring an entire group of people as predators? What do you say to that, critic?
Well, I think this kind of argument is gone a wee bit off and centre here, because we're talking about, when people talk about safe spaces or women-only spaces, it doesn't necessarily mean anything to do with the idea of being attacked in these spaces. A lot of these ideas about safety, dignity, and also respect about why we actually have these single-sex spaces. So when we're actually looking at kind of loos or the change rooms, and this argument that keeps coming up, and that we're so worried about this kind of individual that could come in and actually attack us, it's nothing to do with that. We're actually talking about dignity and respect and why we actually have these spaces.
Yes.
And we're concerned about kind of changes in legislation which are actually happening in Scotland, which is the move to self-ID, when anyone this is open to anyone, this is not to do with a transgender ideology, it's open to absolutely everyone, that after 3 months you can actually rock up to a notary, just like stamp a kind of thing, say I'm the opposite sex. That's it. And then you'll have 3 months of reflection after that. So there's a bit of a kind of confusion with the length of time when people are talking about this. It's 3 months. And then 3 months actually reflection after that. And then you will have changed your sex.
Yes.
Your sex. And this changes your birth certificate. And people don't seem to get this. This actually allows the change of a legal historical document will be changed.
Well, isn't it just that people are using different definitions here? I mean, because I feel that I'm a liberal, so I believe anyone should have the right to identify however they like, call themselves whatever they like, dress however they like. That is my view on that subject. But I think to make a claim that your biological sex has changed because you've simply said it has, I think that's not a truth. And therefore that shouldn't be perceived to be transphobic to say that that's not. I mean, that's my view on these things.
Well, it's not. We're getting to the point of the emperor has no clothes on. No one actually wants to call this out. And so there'll be individuals like myself or other different organisations or individuals going, no, sex is reality. Why can't we talk about this? And everyone's going, oh, no, don't. No, we have to all agree because we don't want to be called the TERF, the Nazi, the bigot.
Well, also the threats.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned in the start about Rosie Duffield not going to the Labour Party conference because of threats that she's received. And I do see a lot of the language around this debate is there's so much violent rhetoric, imagery. It's very toxic. There's some really horrible threats that I've seen towards women who, a lot of them just want to have the conversation. So how do we find a situation where we can move beyond the toxicity of this debate and say, look, we disagree, but can we sit down and talk about it? Will that ever happen?
Well, it'll be really helpful for the kind of males who'd stop actually threatening us for a start, because it's actually not coming from other females threatening us, the kind of acts of violence.
Yeah.
When we get aspects on Twitter about punch the turf, if you see one of a member for Women Scotland, and I'm kind of quite visible so people can actually see me.
Yeah, we do. I think we should emphasise though that this isn't trans people doing this. This is a tiny minority of activists. It's not even most activists who behave like this. It's a very aggressive minority who are not representative of trans
absolutely people. Absolutely not. This is a small, it's a minority of males, basically. Yeah. That are actually trying to kind of threaten and shut us down and able to have this conversation. And it is scary and it is worrying. And you see what's happened to Rosie Duffield and lots more other women that are out there and politicians, and also male politicians that actually can't talk about the subject matter either. And so how we get through this is, I think, is if the more people, including politicians, including media, will actually start holding these conversations like that, say, look, what the heck is this? How do we move this forward? But also understanding that sex is a reality.
Well, this is a conversation that I'm keen to have. And one day I'm hoping to get people from both sides onto the same show to talk about this, because I think it is very important. But Marion Calder, thank you so much for coming to join us today.